Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome to another episode of Next Step Espresso, your daily shot of fitness. I am your host, as always, Johnny Landals from Next Step Nutrition, bringing you the podcast that helps you overcome the industry confusion and get results for life. Today, we're on episode 391. Now, it's very easy to get a lot of knowledge these days, right? We live in the era of Google and the internet, where we have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of articles and knowledge truly at the touch of a button. So it's fair to say that when we want an answer to something, we could Google it and we can look it up. But it's also then fair to say that our options these days are unlimited, right? It's easy to get confused as what to eat because there's so many choices. You don't just have a few places that you could go if you wanted to go out. I mean, obviously right now we can't go anywhere apart from takeaways for us in England, but there are so many options out there. A lot of the time we think this makes life better, but actually it in fact makes it worse, right? More knowledge is not the answer. You'll know this in that you're listening to this podcast, and thankfully you trust me to be one of your guides through the fitness industry to help you dissect the info and help you learn what you truly need to know. But you'll know that if you Google anything that I say, you'll find people that disagree, you'll find people that agree, and you'll find things that just plain don't make sense and other things that do make sense. And this is the problem, is that unless you have extensive qualifications, you've spent your time critically thinking about a certain subject, more knowledge does not help, because you can't make sense of all the information by yourself. You need help interpreting it. That's why when you want to get a career, oftentimes you specialize in that career by learning as much as you can, either through the school system and through a degree, or through books, courses, podcasts, anything and everything you can on a certain topic, but you still specify the people you listen to for certain answers, right? So if you were listening right now to my podcast and then you listened to a keto podcast, you would get a completely different view on carbohydrates and the role of insulin. Similarly, if you listened to Joe Rogan's podcast with the guy who, banged on about the carnivore diet, you'll have a very different opinion of vegetables compared to whether you listen to a Danny Lennon podcast about from a vegan advocate. So it's nonsense to look far and wide for answers some of the time, because actually all it does is confuse you and oftentimes leads you to information overload, rabbit in the headlights, and just leads to paralysis by analysis, right? Why else do we look for houses with estate agents, right? Why do we say to an estate agent, we're looking for this type of house in this type of area for this type of price? Can you help us? Yes, we can, because it stops you from Googling it all, going down rabbit holes of, what about this area? Is that area better to live in? What about this area? What about that? Ooh, I don't know. Should we live there? Should we have a 2-bed? What about a 3-bed? You use an estate agent to help dissect what you truly want. Same thing with a doctor. You go to them with your troubles and they ask you questions and they find a diagnosis for you. If you try to diagnose yourself on Google, you'll quickly realise that you're dying, even though you probably wouldn't be. And same thing with dentistry, architecture, all these other things. When you're faced with too much choice, your brain defaults and or switches off, which is why finding more knowledge and options when it comes to fitness isn't inherently helpful, because all you're doing is further confusing yourself, further putting yourself into inaction, and then not really getting anywhere. So if you're listening to this podcast and this sounds like you've just looked for too long, not really decided on anything to do because you keep confusing yourself, my advice to you today is to pick one and stick with it for long enough to see if it's working. Or 2, if you really need help with it, then why don't you hire us? Because you're listening to the podcast, you clearly like what I have to say. You clearly think that we're a business who you might want to work with. So if you need help dissecting that information, we will happily be your guide. And we do have some spots available right now for personal coaching. And you can find more information in the link of the show notes. For now, remember, more options, usually worse. That's what Barry Schwartz talks about in The Paradox of Choice. So that's a recommended book for you for today. You need a guide to help you dissect the information of any expert topic, because otherwise you'll find yourself down a rabbit hole that you can't climb out of. Thank you as always for listening to today's episode of Next Step Espresso. If you enjoyed it, I would love it if you could share it with someone who would also find it useful. Have a great Tuesday, and I'll see you again tomorrow for another Daily Shot of Fitness.